Hi everyone. So in this video I'll be dealing with the essay The Meaning of Art by Herbert Read. Now I know that this essay is a bit lengthy, but I have tried to break it down, break down the ideas in the most simplest manner that you can understand. So whenever you're learning a literary work, whenever you're learning an essay, or if it's a poem, or if it's a novel, or even if it's a painting, that if you're trying to learn it, it is very important that from the exam point of view, you have an idea about the author or the creator of that artistic work. So you need to have an idea about the author. So let's dive into a few facts about the author of this essay, The Meaning of Art, and that is Herbert Read. Now, Herbert Read, he was born in the year 1893 and died in the year 1968. He's an art historian, a poet, a philosopher, a literary and art critic, and from the year 1922 to 1931, he worked as a curator at Victoria and Albert Museum. And in 1936, he worked as an organizer at London International Surrealist Exhibition, and it was in the year 1931 that he published the essay, The Meaning of Art. Now, these are a few points that you are supposed to remember, because if in the exam they ask you an essay question, then it will be really nice if you can begin the essay by giving an introduction to the author. Now, this essay is written in 25 paragraphs, and I'll give you a summary of each paragraph. So the first paragraph, in the first paragraph, Herbert Read, he defines art. He tells us what art is. Now, he calls all the visual arts. Visual arts are the arts that you can see, like the paintings, the drawings, the sculptures, the film photography, all of these are visual arts. And he calls these visual arts as plastic art. Plastic art is something that does not have life. It is not that very lively to watch. That is what Herbert Read says. So he calls all the visual arts as plastic arts. And then he gives us certain instances of the artist. For example, if you take an architect, then how does an architect create buildings? If an architect is going to create a building, then he would have a reference in his mind. He would have a particular design that he was influenced from the outside, that he was influenced from the external world. It is from an external element that he's influenced, and he takes this design, he adopts it, and then he creates an artistic building based on this design. So it is basically already existing idea that has been used to create this building. Okay, so that is how an architect creates artistic buildings. Now, if you take a painter, if a painter has seen a tree and if he wants to paint a tree, then it is nothing but an imitation of the tree that he saw in the real world, or the tree that he saw in the reality. So painters imitate the representation of the visible world. Now, Herbert Read here, he mentions a philosopher, Schopenhauer, who suggests that art must aspire to the condition of music. Because if you take a music, then it would have a different rhythm, it would have different lyrics, it would have different tunes, or it would be an amalgamation, a combination of different meters, a combination of different rhythms, different beats, So it is always unique. It is very creative because it comes directly into the mind of an individual. It is not a mere imitation, but it is something that is very creatively produced. So art must be creative, according to Herbert Read. And he says that music is an art that is creative, it is unique, because it is not produced out of a conscious effort, but it is something that is freely created. So he talks about different artists, and then he asks, what is exactly the aim of an artist? The aim of an artist is to create a sense of pleasure. Now, what is the sense of pleasure? The sense of pleasure is equivalent to the sense of beauty. So he says that everything that is beautiful can evoke or it can create a sense of pleasure. It can make us feel delighted about it. Okay, it is kind of pleasing to the eyes. It is pleasing to our five senses. That is the sense of pleasure. So if you want to have a sense of pleasure, then this artistic work, it must be beautiful. It should have a sense of beauty. Now, these are the ideas that he discusses in the first paragraph. And then moving on to the second paragraph, he talks about what is the sense of beauty. Now, even if you take the architecture, now the architect, he creates these artistic buildings for utilitarian purposes, for some useful purposes. Now in Kollam, we have an art cafe. Now this art cafe, it is an artistic building. It is built in an artistic manner. It gives us an aesthetic experience. So it is created in the most beautiful manner, but ultimately, what is the aim of it? It is nothing but to run the business in this artistic building and to gain some profit. The only aim of this art cafe is to get some profit. Now, if you take a poet, he creates poems. And what do the audience do? The readers, they would read this poem and they would discuss about this poem, or they would critically analyze about this poem, and it becomes a part of our daily conversations. So the ideas that are expressed in a poem is actually shared with others, and it becomes a part of the daily conversation. Now, if you take music, music is created in order to create a sense of pleasure within the minds of the individuals. So whenever we hear a music, it kind of touches our heart. Some music we like, some music we don't like, but ultimately the aim of the musician was to create a sense of pleasure in the minds of the individuals. Now, how does an artist create a sense of beauty? Be it an architect, be it a poet, or be it a musician, how does he create the sense of beauty? Now, if you take visual arts, then the paintings, drawings, sculptures, and film photography, how do they create a sense of beauty? They create a sense of beauty with whatever surface, shape, or mass is available to them. They arrange it and rearrange it and give the artistic work a structure, or they give this art form a structure. And that's how it creates a sense of beauty. For example, suppose, let's take an example. Suppose this is a piece of stone. It is a mass. It is a piece of stone. And now what does a sculptor do? A sculptor, he would use his tools and he would sculpt, or he would carve the stone, maybe like in the form of a tree. Okay, maybe he is sculpting this particular stone in the form of a tree. Now see, when you look at the stone, is the stone attractive? Does it gives us a sense of pleasure? Not really, right? When you look at the stone, it is just a mass. It is just a shapeless mass. It doesn't it is not that attractive, or it doesn't gives me a sense of pleasure. But when the sculptor, he sculpts the stone into a tree, into the form of a tree, then it is attractive to me. Then I would like to keep it at my home as a decorative item. I would like to use this sculpture of a tree as a decorative item in my garden, and then it is attractive to me. So whatever shape or whatever surface, or it could be a canvas or it could be a paper, whatever surface or whatever mass is given to an artist, what do? They actually shape it, or they arrange it or rearrange it. and they give the artwork a form or a structure. And that is how it creates a sense of beauty. So in the second paragraph, he talks about the sense of beauty. Then in the third paragraph, he defines beauty. So what is beauty? Beauty is a unity of formal relations, form or structure among sense perceptions. It simply means, let's say if you take the poet Wordsworth, when Wordsworth saw a field of daffodils, daffodils are flowers, right? So William Wordsworth, who is a romantic poet, he saw a field of daffodils. He goes back home. He lies on his couch. Couch is basically a sofa. So he lies on his couch and he is reflecting. He's thinking about those daffodils. And then he writes about these daffodils in the form of a poem. So he gives his idea about the daffodils a poetic structure. And that's how this artwork, the poem, is formed or it is created. So his ideas that was sensed by his five senses. Now he saw the daffodils. So the sense, the sense that has been used is his eyes. So it's a sensory perception, right? So he saw the daffodils, and then he gave it a structure. He saw the daffodils. There's an idea that comes into his mind, and this idea is given a structure, or it is given a form. And that form is what we call as beauty. Now, Herbert Read says that every artistic work must have a form, only then it can be called as beautiful. So Herbert considers this definition as the basis to build any theory of art. If you want to analyze any art form, if you want to analyze any artwork, then it definitely should have a structure. If it has a structure, if it has a form, then you can call it as beautiful. Yeah, then you can call that it has a sense of beauty in it. Now in the fourth paragraph, he differentiates. He gives the difference or the distinction between art and beauty. Now up till the first three paragraphs, it is understood that art is beautiful. Art needs to have a sense of beauty, and that everything that is beautiful is art. But the artists from Greece and Europe, they had an entirely different idea. So if you take the classical Greeks and Europeans, they considered perfection or idealization as beautiful art. Now this was a misconception on art put out by the Greeks. Now for the Greeks, art had to be perfect. Suppose if you are making a sculpture, okay, if you're making a sculpture of a person, then the sculpture of that person must be perfect. It should look like as if it is the person. Like the eyebrows, the eyes, the nose, everything should be perfectly captured. Right? Suppose if a Greek artist is making a sculpture of me, if he is carving out a stone and making a sculpture of me, then he would carve my eyebrows in the shape that it is. Then the slight squint that I have in my eyes will be properly brought in that sculpture. And the way how my nose is, if it's straight or if it's twisted, all that twist and everything, it will be captured exactly. So art had to be perfect in order to call it beautiful. Now this was a concept that was brought by the Greek artist or some of the European artists. Okay, so in the fourth paragraph, he talks about the difference between art and beauty. Now in the fifth paragraph, he tells us about a theory. Okay, now we know that if an art is beautiful, then it will definitely give us a sense of pleasure. But then he says that there is no distinction, of art as beautiful or ugly. In fact, every art is beautiful in its own way. So he gives us this theory of aesthetics. This is a theory that was put forward by an Italian philosopher, Benedetto Croce. Benedetto Croce. Okay, this is an Italian name. I would like you to remember the name in a way so that you don't misspell in your exams. Okay, like remember the right spelling of the name. Benedetto Croce. Okay, so Benedetto Croce, an Italian philosopher, he put out this theory called as the theory of aesthetics, in which he says that art must not be defined as beauty. Art should not be defined as something that is beautiful, but instead art must be defined as intuition, because when you take art, you know in every artwork, it is created naturally. Every artwork is created naturally. It just comes to the artist. It just naturally comes to the artist. So every art is intuitive. Now, what do you mean by intuition? Intuition means the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. So, for example, when you first saw this essay, The Meaning of Art, when you flipped through the pages of your textbook, you saw that this was a very lengthy essay. Now, what was the first thing that came into your mind? You felt that this essay is really difficult to learn, right? So without putting any conscious effort, without putting any sort of efforts to read the essay and to understand it, from the first look of it, you felt that this essay was going to be difficult to understand. So that's an intuitive feeling. That is an instinctive feeling, or that is intuition, that natural feeling that this would be difficult. So you're not putting any sort of conscious effort in it. You're not consciously reasoning about it. You're not consciously thinking about it or trying to consciously understand it, right? So something that is natural, something that is instinctive is what we call as art. Okay. Now this was a theory that was put by Benedetto Croce. So art is defined as intuition. Intuition means something that naturally occurs to the artist. Okay. So in the fifth paragraph, he talks about art as intuition. Moving on to the sixth paragraph, where he gives us the classical idea of beauty that was put forward by the Greek artist. So the classical idea of beauty is a concept that arose in ancient Greece. Now he gives us certain examples of classical art, like for example, Apollo Belvedere's sculpture. Okay, Apollo Belvedere's sculpture, I'll show it on the next slide. Now, Apollo Belvedere's sculpture is a marble sculpture, and it is located in the octagonal court of the Museum Theo Clementino, Vatican. Now, this particular sculpture is of an athlete. Okay, now this athlete, he is beardless, he is naked, his body is smooth, and you can see how perfectly it has been made. Right, it has been perfectly carved out, and it looks like a human figure, right? So this is the sculpture of Apollo Belvedere, and the Greeks call it as the classical art. So this is an example of the classical idea of beauty. Now another example he gives is of another sculpture which is called as Aphrodite of Milos. And in Roman language, it is called as Venus de Milo. So in Greek, we call it as Aphrodite of Milos. Now, Milos is an island in Greece. And in Roman language, we call it as Venus de Milo. Now, Venus de Milo, or Aphrodite of Milos, she is a goddess of love and beauty. Okay, so even in Paris in France, Venus is considered as the goddess of love and beauty. So this particular statue, it was discovered by a Greek farmer, and that is the reason why this statue of Aphrodite of Milo, she doesn't have hands. So Now, what is this classical of idea of beauty? So he gives us two examples. One is that of Apollo of Belvedere, and the other one is of Aphrodite of Milos. So these are the two examples that come under the classical idea of beauty that is put forward by Greeks. So it is nothing but, if an art needs to be beautiful, then it needs to be perfect. So Greeks considered perfect types of humanity, perfectly formed, perfectly proportioned, noble and serene forms of art as beautiful. So when you take a sculpture, it needs to look like a human being. You know, if you take the sculpture of Apollo Belvedere, he looks like a manly figure, right? He looks like an athlete. He's beardless, he's naked, just the way he was. And it is perfectly formed. All his, rib linings, like he doesn't have six packs, I suppose, his shoulders, his nose, his eyes, everything has been presented in a proportioned manner, you know with proper measurements, and it looks serene. It doesn't look like ugly or something. It looks beautiful. It's a beautiful sculpture. So according to the Greeks, the artworks must be perfect in order to call it as beautiful, and this is the classical idea of beauty. Now this philosophy of art by Greeks was inherited even by the Romans, and it was revived in Renaissance. Now this is the sculpture of Aphrodite of Milos. Now you can see, as I told you, that this sculpture was discovered by a Greek farmer, and that is the reason why this doesn't have hands. But if when it was in its original form, before it was even, I don't know whether it was abandoned or something. Probably it was lost or something, that the Greek farmer had to find it out, that the Greek farmer discovered it in his farming fields. So Aphrodite of Milos, as you can see, when it was in its original form, it definitely had hands. So it is presented in the most perfect manner. If you can look at the nose, the eyes, then even the breast and the legs and everything, everything is presented in the most perfect manner. So for the Greeks, for the Greek artist, art had to be perfect in order to be beautiful. So I hope that's clear to you. Now, Herbert affirms that certain art are ugly. It is true that not every art can be called as beautiful. This is affirmed, or it is considered to be okay by Herbert Read. He says that not every art has to be beautiful. Some art are ugly. And then he says, gives us certain examples of artworks that are ugly, like a Greek Aphrodite, Byzantine Madonna, savage idol from New Guinea, or a savage idol from Ivory Coast. Now let me show you the images of it. So this is Byzantine Madonna. Now you can see that this doesn't really look like a human figure. This is just a symbolic representation of a human figure. This is about a lady and a child in her hand, probably a symbolic representation of Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ. So Byzantine Madonna, it is a symbolic representation. It's just like an abstract form, right? And Virgin Mary didn't look like this, or Jesus Christ didn't look like this. It doesn't really put forward a human figure, right? It's just a symbolic representation. Then this is an idol from New Guinea. Now this doesn't look like a human being, right? This doesn't look like a human being. So these kind of art, that were not perfect, was considered to be ugly by the Greek artist. And Herbert Read says that, there are certain artworks that are kind of ugly. But then Herbert Read says that we should not restrict art to any particular form, to any particular rule. Now, perfectionism is not something that must be pursued by artists. Now, it is not necessary that every artwork, every artwork must be regular. Even irregular forms of artworks are beautiful. So art should not be seen in a restrictive sense. Art is not uniform. Just because the Greek artist said that art is supposed to be perfect, it doesn't mean that art is supposed to be perfect. Even if the artist, they create a sculpture with certain imperfections, but but even then it will be beautiful. So art is not supposed to be seen in a restrictive sense. It should not be confined to certain rules or to certain concepts, but instead it should be freely created, just like music. It should be creatively created. It must be unique. It should give up the audience a sense of pleasure. So this is what he discusses in the seventh paragraph, that is, art is not uniform. Now in the next video, I'll be talking to you about the ideas that are conveyed in the following paragraphs. So up to now, we have discussed the ideas that are presented in the 7 paragraphs. So I hope that it is clear to you guys.